You have been listening to the OMG podcast with Paul Finkelstein. We can help you build wealth without hogging your time. Schedule a one-on-one with us. Thanks for listening. Join us again for another OMG podcast segment.
Hey everybody, this is Paul Finkelstein, and we are getting ready in the studio to interview another call-in. This is a call-in example, so if you are actually interested in calling in, any given Sunday, you might be listening to one of our call-ins where they just dial a phone number, my phone number. They can call into the studio here at OMG Biz Cafe Live Talk Radio, where we gather all kinds of niche small business owners, entrepreneurs, and workaholic professionals. So today, I'll put up on the screen, our special guest is Sarah Finkelstein. No bias here, but anyway, you could reach Sarah at signatureadvisorgroup.com, and you can call her actually at 561-302-5760. But hi, Sarah, how are you today?
I am doing great. Good morning.
Good to hear you. Speak up a little bit.
Yes. Good morning.
Fantastic. You got your coffee in hand, ready for some interviews?
I certainly do. I love my morning coffee.
Excellent. So thank you for calling in. That way you don't have to worry about adjusting your makeup and all that. People actually don't have to worry about their makeup too. It's a Sunday morning. It's 8:30 in the morning Eastern time here. Our first question of the day is, what exactly is long-term care insurance and how is it different than regular health insurance? But before you answer that question, tell us about your experience with long-term care. Way back, there was something you had to deal with long-term care insurance, and also very recently, and anything in between.
Certainly. So basically, my first experience with long-term care was with my mom, who was living in New York still, and he relocated to Florida, needed assistance. And so I made a trip to New York and brought her down to Florida. And because I was working full time, I could not quit my job to take care of mom full time. So I ended up finding an assisted living community for her to live in. And she was there for 6 years, followed by 2 years in a nursing home, which is a total of 8 years, which is above what they call the average long-term care claim. And you asked me, how is long-term care different than regular health insurance? Two totally different things. So everybody has health insurance, or I should say most Americans have some form of health insurance that covers them if they get sick so that they can go to the doctor, get treatments. If they need to end up in the hospital, it pays for those things. But long-term care is basically when we need assistance. Most people think of long-term care as an elderly or a senior type of situation, but not necessarily, because about 40% of people that are receiving long-term care are actually on the young side, younger than 65. And that could be due to a bad car accident, motorcycle accident, a stroke. There's many reasons why somebody who's on the young side might need long-term care. So let me explain what long-term care is. It is the assistance that one needs when they can no longer do 2 out of 6 activities of daily living. It's called ADLs, activities of daily living, that we all take for granted on a daily basis. And they are dressing, eating, toileting, getting in and out of a chair, ambulating, continence. Those 6 activities of daily living, as long as one person needs help with 2 out of those 6, they officially qualify to go on long-term care. And that care could take place in one's home. It could take place in an assisted living community or a nursing home. So most people, when I talk to them and I say, where do you want to get your care when the time comes that you need it?
So Sarah, you definitely sound like you're a proponent of long-term care and that somebody should consider long-term care insurance strongly.
Absolutely, because people are living longer, and the longer we live, the greater the chances are that we will need long-term care at some point.
Could you tell us what kind of long-term care services does this insurance cover?
It covers having somebody come into your home, like an aide, to help you with those activities of daily living. It covers if somebody needs to or wants to get that care in an assisted living community and they move into that community, it would pay for that, which is not cheap, let me tell you. And it would also pay for nursing home care.
Well, can long-term care insurance help cover assisted living and nursing home costs?
Absolutely. If somebody plans ahead, then their long-term care policy would pay for those services. If somebody doesn't do the planning and they need the care, well, then they just pay out of pocket. So they take that money from their savings, their retirement accounts, and oftentimes what can happen is that those funds could be depleted, which is why it's important for people to plan ahead, think of themselves, and also think of their relatives, because if mom or dad needs help, guess what? The adult child is going to get that phone call, and that adult child will have to find a way to deal with it, whether it's financially or whether they take some time off from work to get mom or dad situated and get them the care that they need.
So let me ask you, Sarah, how do I know if I need long-term care insurance?
Well, if you already need it, it's too late to get the coverage. It's kind of like if you had a fire in your home, you can't call the insurance company and get coverage for that fire. So the same thing with long-term care. It's one of those things that we need to plan for before the time comes that we actually need it. And statistically, 70% of people over the age of 65 will need long-term care.
That's quite a hefty statistic. Is there a certain age when I should start thinking about long-term care insurance?
I would say starting at the age of 50 would be a good time. The younger we are when we get it, the more economical it is. The longer we wait to apply for it, assuming that we are accepted by the insurance company, the more expensive it is. For each year that you wait to get started on a program, the more expensive it will be. But we also want to do it when we're relatively healthy, because not everybody can qualify for long-term care coverage.
All right. So what are some key things people should look into for a long-term care insurance policy?
Well, they have to look at their nest egg and their assets and how much they can afford. And there's two ways of looking at that. One is, how long will my money last paying for care if I don't have the protection in place? And number two is, how much would it cost to protect myself? And like all insurance, it's pennies on the dollar. You spend pennies to get many dollars of coverage. So basically what long-term care protection does, it protects one's dignity, and it also protects people from becoming a burden to their children, which is one of the top major fears that retirees have, is not wanting to become a burden to their children.
Now, tell me, how long does long-term care insurance last? Does it last forever?
Excellent question. So basically, you buy what you can afford to continue to pay on an annual basis. Once you go on claim, the premiums are waived. But until you go on claim, you have to pay your premiums. Kind of like homeowners insurance, you continue paying that continuously as long as you live in your home. Same thing with auto insurance. So people will design, or we will work with clients to design a plan that works for them. And although all of us would maybe like to drive a Lamborghini or some other vehicle that might be expensive, not all of us can afford that. And maybe you might want to protect 100% of that exposure. but maybe you're not in a position to pay for that. So what we do is we design a plan that works for clients' budgets. And that's important because we don't want to recommend a policy that people cannot afford to continue to pay on.
So let me ask you too, what is the process of applying for long-term care? How does that work?
Well, what I do is when I sit down with clients, and oftentimes it's over Zoom because not everybody is here in my home state of Florida. We do an educational portion to make sure that they understand what it is, how it works, and see if it's really indeed something that they need. Some people can afford to self-insure, which means that they have enough money somewhere in savings in the bank, wherever it might be, that they can afford when the time comes, they could pay for it outright out of their own pocket. But what I have found is there are some people that can afford to self insure and are thrifty and they like to save money and they would rather pass the risk or a portion of the risk to an insurance company and save money in the long run. So it all depends on the individual.
How is your feeling on the rates? How do they change over time for long-term care insurance?
Well, we have seen carriers have rate increases. And the reason for that is a lot of companies used to offer lifetime coverage, meaning that once one goes on claim, it'll pay for them to be on claim, whether they're on it for 8 years, 10 years, or 20 years for their lifetime, however long that would be. And there was really no way for the insurance companies to quantify that risk because they didn't know how many people would go on claim and how many of those people that were on claim would live really long lives while they were on claim. And they also figured that a bunch of people would let their policies go. They would stop paying on them and they would lapse. And that hasn't happened to the degree that they anticipated. So therefore, they're paying out a lot in claims. And that's why there are rate increases. But in the insurance world, there's rate increases, whether it's auto insurance, homeowners insurance, Medicare supplement, there's always rate increases. There's no traditional long-term care policy where your premiums are set to stay level for as long as you have the policy.
Well, thank you for that. Tell us, though, does long-term care insurance cover in-home care?
Absolutely, it does. And most people that I've talked to want to stay at home as long as possible. And that's understandable. We have our surroundings, we have all of our family belongings, memorabilia, and mementos. So we want to stay in our home as long as possible. But a lot of people do end up moving into assisted living because then they're not isolated. They have other people around them. The community might have activities and entertainment. So it's different. And things are taken care of for them, like housekeeping and meals and so on.
Thank you for that. So are there policies that provide coverage for home modifications like ramps or lifts?
Yes, they do. They do provide for that, and that is a part of planning for the need of having long-term care.
And can a person's spouse or family member provide long-term care if they're covered by insurance?
There are a select few companies that will pay for the informal caregiver to provide care, but I would say most of them do not. There's certain types of alternative types of vehicles that may provide some cash benefits to pay for that. But those questions and concerns we handle on a case by case basis because you know what? Not everybody has children, and and if they do have children, they may not be close by. They might be across the on the other end of the country. So most insurance companies want the caregiver to be through an agency or a registry of some kind.
Excellent. We're about at the halfway point. I have a few more questions, but I did want to put on the screen what our studio looks like, where if somebody actually wanted to join in and ask Sarah a question while we have her on the line, you can go to omgtalk.com and click on the button on that page. It'll take you to the top of a page where you click the button to come right into our studio just as a guest at the very bottom. So just wanted to make that available to you. If you want to ask a question and be live right on the screen, just go to omgtalk.com and you could ask Sarah live in person, or I'll continue with some more questions here. We're just at the halfway point as well. Sarah, you're still there, right?
Yes, I am here.
Okay, excellent. So here's our next question. Are premiums for long-term care insurance tax deductible?
Yes, they are tax deductible up to certain dollar amounts, depending upon the person's age. So the older the person is, the more that they can deduct off their tax return.
Now, here's a crazy question. What happens if I stop paying my premiums for long-term care?
Oh, yeah. So what happens is you have no more coverage if you stop paying your premiums.
So that could be something somebody want to pay attention when their mail comes into their house, or electronic. It comes something. A lot of people get their mail today in email, and that could be lost. Could be a dangerous thing when it comes to a long-term care policy. You might want to have the paper copy as well. But can you use long-term care insurance alongside Medicare or Medicaid?
Yes, Medicare is like a health insurance program for people that are 65 and older. And there's special plans that Medicaid has to help to pay for the care, long-term care.
Okay, so what's the difference between a cash benefit and a reimbursement policy? Any thoughts on that?
Some policies offer a cash benefit, which is a smaller dollar amount than their regular benefit that they're getting, which can be used for possibly paying for an informal caregiver to provide care.
Now, how soon after starting a policy can I access my benefits?
You can access your benefits immediately. Most policies do have a deductible period. It could be 90 days, which means that once one qualifies to go on claim, they have to pay for the first 90 days before the policy kicks in and that gives them their benefits.
Okay. So could I use long-term care insurance if I move to another state? I'm in Florida and I move to Tennessee. What happens then?
Absolutely. You can move anywhere across the country. Your policy goes with you. Your coverage goes with you.
Okay. So what are the top misconceptions that people have about long-term care insurance? Thoughts on that?
Well, absolutely. The first one that comes to my mind is the misconception that I won't need it. And we know statistically 2 out of 3 people over 65 will need it. So if you're that 1 out of 3 who doesn't need it, then you're very, very fortunate. I can tell you for myself, I've had my long-term care policy for more than 2 decades, and I pay for it begrudgingly because, let's face it, I'd rather spend the money on a trip. But I know it provides peace of mind. However, I keep my fingers crossed that I will be that 1 out of 3 that never uses it because not needing it. And but I know statistically that the chances are much, much greater that at some point down the road, I will need to use my policy. So basically, it does provide peace of mind. And I'm not one of those people that can use the excuse, oh, my kids will take care of me, because I don't have kids. But when I hear that from people, it's kind of interesting when they say that, because most oftentimes their kids might not be close by. As a matter of fact, that might be very far away. Their kids might be working, most likely, and maybe their kids are raising their own children and they can't just pack up and go and take care of mom or dad indefinitely. They might be able to do it for a short period of time, but to move and leave their spouse behind, their job behind, their kids behind, to take care of a relative, and although we love our families, but it's not practical unless one is a multimillionaire and they can do that. So did I answer the question?
I think so, and I have a bunch more. Does long-term care cover insurance? Long-term care insurance covers skilled nursing care.
Absolutely, yes. Again, it covers for home care. So you have somebody come into your home to provide the care. It covers if you need or want to go into an assisted living community, and it does cover skilled care. What I want to say about the assisted living communities, I know in my area, and I'm in Delray Beach, Florida, we see a lot of new communities popping up. And oftentimes I like to go to those communities and see what they're like and see what their apartments look like, what kind of activities they have. Well, I got to tell you, the newer they are, the more expensive they are, and the more beautiful they are. So everything looks beautiful. And activities, they do have activities. So it's a choice between leaving one's home behind and moving into an assisted living, because one needs or a couple might need some extra care and can't take care of those things like the household chores and cooking and shopping and all that kind of stuff.
Now, diving into looking into that long-term care insurance policy, it has a buzzword called the benefit period. What does that mean in regards to a long-term care insurance policy?
Excellent question. A benefit period is the amount of time that the policy will pay for your long-term care needs. So it could be a 3-year policy, a 5-year policy, a 10-year policy, and in some cases, it can be a lifetime policy. Of course, the greater the benefit period, the higher the premiums, naturally, right? That makes sense. But I always say to people, get a basic policy. Let's take a look at what a basic policy would be. And a basic policy would be a 3-year benefit that pays out $3,000 a month. And in many cases, $3,000 a month is not going to cover everything. However, people do have other income and assets, like their Social Security. Maybe they have a pension or an annuity that pays them income every month, so they could supplement that policy that's going to pay for them that $3,000 a month. So basic plan is what we call a 3-3-3 plan. $3,000 a month in benefit, 3% inflation protection over a 3-year benefit period. And the inflation protection is important, especially for people that are younger, because we know if you're in your 50s and you may not need to use your policies till you're in your 80s, then we know over that time period, inflation is going to hit the costs. And a $3,000 policy today is not going to cover what it's going to cost 20 years down the road. So the inflation portion is really important. Even at 3% inflation, it does creep up in benefits from year to year to year. Even when one is already on claim, they still get that inflation protection growth in their policy.
So thank you for that. Then I lied before. I said that we were halfway through, and now we are actually halfway through our questions. These are really great and important questions regarding long-term care. And if you're listening on LinkedIn or YouTube or X, you could make a comment, retweet, etc. I'll see it, especially on YouTube and LinkedIn, and I could feature a question on the screen, and then I'll have Sarah answer it as well. You can come on air with us at omgtalk.com, and I will see you come in on video. I'll feature you there on the screen, and you could ask your question to Sarah right from our in studio. So now let's go into our next question, which is, are there any pre-existing health conditions that can affect my eligibility for coverage?
Yes, there are, but I want to go back to my previous point about the basic plan, which is the 3-3-3 plan. I always say to clients, some coverage is better than no coverage. It still protects a portion of your nest egg, and which is very, very important. So some coverage is better than no coverage. Get what you can afford on a regular basis and get the protection that you need, and work with somebody who's knowledgeable about what's available out there on the market, in the market rather. Years ago, decades ago, we used to have many companies, probably 100 companies that were selling traditional long-term care insurance. I would say now it's less than 10 companies that offer traditional long-term care insurance. And one thing I see a lot when visiting these assisted living communities is that most of the residents are female. A small minority are males. Sometimes you'll see a couples living there, but I would say 90% plus are women. So we know that women outlive men, generally speaking, and we end up alone at some point, which is why the long-term care planning is so important, especially for women. We know that when we have a married couple, typically the wife will take care of the husband. But then who's going to take care of the wife? It's always a bigger issue for women than it is for men. I just wanted to share that with you. And I'm sorry, you were asking me.
About pre-existing health conditions that affect eligibility for coverage.
Yeah, so yes, there are different companies have different criteria as to what they will accept. I can't tell you offhand all the different um, qualifications, but that's why we have a questionnaire that we send to clients that are interested in considering the protection, and they fill out this questionnaire. It asks about their health situation and their medications and what conditions they have. So the insurance company really doesn't want to, as we call, buy the risk. In other words, they don't want somebody that's going to be going on claim next month. They have to be relatively healthy so that they know that it's not likely that they're going to need it right away. If somebody needs right away, then they cannot get the coverage.
So, does long-term care insurance cover transportation to medical appointments?
Well, if somebody has an aide, the aide would do that for them, and that would be part of their benefits.
Okay, and how do insurance companies determine the eligibility for long-term care insurance?
It's based on their health criteria. It's called underwriting. So whenever we submit an application for somebody to get long-term care protection, there are health questions on the application. Typically, the insurance company will request medical records from the insured's doctor so that they could review them, and the underwriting process can take 6 to 8 weeks.
Wow.
But the nice thing is that when the person submits the application, they do not need to submit a deposit, a premium payment with their application. Just when they are approved, they have to submit their premium payment.
Now, what would happen if I changed my insurance provider?
Your doctor, you mean?
I think so.
That's no issue.
Okay. And how often should I review or update my long-term care insurance policy?
I would say every few years would be a good idea to review it to see if the coverage is still up to par. Sometimes people buy a policy and 20 years goes by and they buy another policy to make up the difference for the rise in cost of long-term care. So that is a possibility. One can purchase more than one policy.
Are there any penalties for canceling or not renewing a long-term care insurance?
No, there's no penalties. They just let the policy lapse. Policy ends due to non-payment.
And then if it did end and it did lapse, they'd be open themselves wide open unless they are able to self-insure a big number, perhaps.
Absolutely. Or maybe if they have a very, very wealthy relative in their family who is generous and is willing to help them out. That's actually what happened to Christopher Reeves, Superman. He ran out of money. And it was
Robin Williams?
Robin Williams, thank you. Robin Williams, who came in and helped him, because those long-term care costs are expensive, especially if somebody needs round-the-clock care, 24-hour care. Imagine if you're having care at home and you need 24-hour care. That basically means that you have 3 people 3 8-hour shifts. And boy, let me tell you, that can add up to be $15,000 a month or more, depending upon where in the country you live and what the costs are in that locality.
Now, what are the most common scenarios in which people need long-term care?
Well, one scenario would be a disease like Parkinson's or a cognitive impairment like Alzheimer's. And those kinds of scenarios can last 10 or 15 years. So somebody could live with those and need help for 10 to 15 years. Other scenarios is just people having dementia and they can't take care of themselves and manage their own medications. So it really depends. There's a multitude of cases where people need assistance.
Now, can you pay or can you use long-term care insurance benefits to pay for adult daycare services?
Yes, absolutely. That's another area where they can use their policy to pay for care, adult daycare.
Okay, so does long-term care insurance cover memory care for conditions like Alzheimer's? I think you touched upon that.
Absolutely, it does pay for that. Yes. And memory care happens to be more expensive, even though the assisted living might have a side that offers memory care. The fees for memory care are higher than the regular assisted living fees.
Now,
And by the way, when people move into assisted living, they have what's called the base rent. Their base rent includes their meals as well as housekeeping for their apartment, as well as activities. They don't have to pay for electricity that's provided as part of their base rent. But on top of that, there's some things called levels of care. So depending upon how much care an individual needs while they're living in the assisted living, that gets added to the base rent. So if the base rent is, say, $5,000 a month and they need 4 levels of care, that might add another $2,000 a month to their overall fees for living in the assisted living community. So as you can see, those numbers are not small numbers. They can certainly add up. Of course, the base rent is dependent upon what community one moves into. As I said, the newer and more beautiful they are, the more expensive they are, and what size apartment they end up. They could end up in a studio, which would be a lower base rent than a 1-bedroom or a 2-bedroom apartment. So it really depends. And of course, across the country, it depends what part of the country would be. Some areas are more expensive than others.
okay, now here's a few more questions. So how are these long-term care insurance premiums calculated?
Good question. I don't know about that end of it. That probably would be a great question for an insurance company statistician or whatever their title might be.
And to get a hold of a statistician, is that something where you would be a go-between that person, or I have to find if I have a relative that happens to be one of those?
Yeah, go ahead and file the relative that can be one of those.
All right. So what's the difference between a traditional and a hybrid long-term care insurance policy?
Excellent question. A traditional policy, long-term care insurance policy, it's a pay-as-you-go system with possible rate increases along the way. And it's a use it or lose it. What I mean is if you are one of those 1 out of 3 who is fortunate enough to never need any long-term care, you've paid the insurance company over those years and you've lost it. The money stays with the insurance company. So that's a use it or lose it. Very similar to auto insurance and homeowners insurance. If you never have a claim, you're just paying those premiums for that protection, that peace of mind. But the money stays with the company and they don't pay you out in benefits. And frankly, none of us really want to have an auto claim, God forbid, or a homeowner's claim. We really would prefer to avoid it, but we know the risk can be big. When something does happen, the financial exposure can be big. So that's why we pay for that protection. So that's a use it or lose it. The hybrid policies don't work that way. In other words, and they tend to be more expensive because it is not a use it or lose it. We know somehow somebody is going to benefit from that policy. So let's say the individual pays for their premiums, they don't need it, they stay healthy for the rest of their life, and pass away at a ripe old age, never needing any care. Well, then the policy would pay to a beneficiary. Or if the individual changed their mind because maybe they won $50 million in the lottery, they feel that they no longer need it, they can get a refund on their policy. So that's the difference between a traditional long-term care insurance and hybrid long-term care policy.
Thank you for that. But what's the average cost of long-term care in the U.S. right now?
That's a really difficult question to answer because it's based on age, it's based on where we live, and it's based on the benefits that we want. Do we want the basic 333 policy, or do we want more benefits than that? What do we want the benefit period to be? 3 years, 5 years, or longer? All of those variables impact the premium that one would pay. So it really depends. There's a lot of variables. I always tell people that long-term care coverage is customizable. We customize it for the individual so it fits their budget. And again, we don't want them to take it out 1 year and not be able to carry it through going forward. So it's got to be affordable for the individual or the couple. And we know that typically married people get a discount when they apply for long-term care protection. So that's another nice benefit with the long-term care, is getting that marital discount built into the policy.
Now, some of our listeners are thinking the average cost of long-term care when it comes to buying a long-term care insurance policy or hybrid plan. But some of our listeners might be thinking of the actual cost of the health care in their retirement. Like, I heard it's hundreds of thousands of dollars, or a couple 100,000 or 400,000. Have you heard particular numbers from a couple of sources?
There are many studies, and you can actually go on there and Google it. What is the cost of extended health care in retirement? Some that I've seen, and I haven't looked recently, but from a few years ago, some were 200,000, some were 400,000. It really all depends. The bottom line is, it's a big number that people have to allocate into their retirement budget. Because what happens is, if they don't have a plan in place, it could deplete everything that they've saved for, that they've worked for, and now their retirement account that they had all these wonderful dreams of doing in their retirement is now spent for care. So we want to avoid that. It's very important for people to plan and plan for the what ifs. Long-term care is a big what if. What if I need care? What if my spouse needs care? What if my parent needs care and they don't have the resources to pay for it? How is that going to take place? It's a family affair. Long-term care really is a family affair. And I would love to see families talk about it together. Mom, Dad, what kind of plan do you have in place? Oh, we don't have anything. Well, what are we going to do? How are we going to deal with it when the time comes? Who's going to provide the care? Will Aunt Sally provide the care? Or will we have to chip in and find a way? Maybe all the siblings chip in and pay for care. Or even better, the siblings chip in for a long-term care policy, because they know that eventually one of them will need to deal with it. And I say one of them because even if you have 5 siblings in the family, the burden typically rests on one of those individuals. I don't know why, but that's what I've seen happen many times. So if the parents don't have a plan in place, and maybe they don't have enough resources to get a plan in place, the siblings will chip in together to make sure that mom or dad or both are covered, so that they know. And that's wise planning on the adult children's side, because they know that eventually they'll have to deal with it. So it's better to plan in advance than having to deal with the crisis at some future point.
So preparing for the cost of care is extremely important, as I've just been listening. And
absolutely, yes, for sure.
If they don't, like Lucky's dog bowl, our our wonderful member of our household here, his water bowl evaporates toward the end of the day with the water. And if somebody's portfolio and their retirement funds evaporate, then what would their life look like and how would they feel about that?
That's right. And that's something that most of us don't want to think about. Oh, it's not going to happen to me. I've heard all kinds of rationalizations, but it doesn't cure the problem, the great risk that many of us will face.
Now,
So planning is important.
are there any legal protections for consumers who buy long-term care insurance?
What do you mean by that?
I don't know. Actually, it was a random question out of the internet, and I thought maybe I'd throw it in there and see if it meant anything to you at the moment.
I don't know if they mean the stability of the insurance company. Maybe that's what they're asking.
Could be, yes.
Yeah, I know every state has a Department of Insurance, which is kind of to protect consumers, to make consumers whole. For example, here in Florida, we had a big hurricane back in 1992. It was called Hurricane Andrew. It was the first hurricane that I encountered after I moved to Florida. And a lot of homeowner policies were terminated, and they had to form the joint, they called it the Joint Underwriters Association. So the Department of Insurance got involved to find a carrier to provide homeowners with insurance, because that hurricane made a big dent with a lot of homeowner insurance policies. So the Department of Insurance in every state is a consumer protection agency.
Thank you for that. So what should...
And one more thing I should
Yes?
add to that is we like to deal with carriers that are A-rated, meaning that they're solid companies, they're big companies, they have big financial backing. So the rating of the company is very important. We like to stay in the A, which includes A minus, and A plus rated companies. Some of the other companies like below that would be a B, B minus. We need to make sure that we know what we're getting into.
Now, what should people do if they can't afford long-term care insurance?
That's an excellent question. If they can't afford it, they should have that conversation with their family, their children, their nieces and nephews, their parents. They should have that conversation. Again, long-term care is a family affair.
And can someone who already has health issues still qualify for long-term care insurance? I'm sure it depends on the health issue.
Absolutely. It does depend on the health issues. So the answer is yes,
Okay.
but depending upon what they have going on. So it may be yes or maybe no, depends.
Can you give some examples of how long-term care insurance helped a policyholder?
Absolutely. So some of the carriers have a concierge service that helps them along the claims process, and it provides funding to pay for what they need. So instead of taking money out of their savings account, out of their bank CDs, out of their portfolios, especially in the down market, they have a plan in place to pay for the care that they will eventually most likely need. Again, 70% of people over 65 will need long-term care. And the longer we live, the greater the chances are that we're going to need long-term care.
Now, I heard that long-term care, some people do like a discount or a coupon. We're all conscious shoppers, the thrifty ones especially out there. Are there any special discounts or coupons and options for married couples buying together?
Yes, there is a marital discount that the insurance companies will extend to a married couple.
All right. So what are the consequences of waiting too long to purchase a long-term care insurance?
Well, basically, I would say there's two consequences. One is that they may become uninsurable. And two is that, assuming that they are insurable, the premiums will be higher because they are older.
Okay. So are there any tips to lowering the long-term care insurance premiums? How do we get those things lower? We don't want to pay too much for a muffler.
So basically, when we all shop around for auto insurance, we will increase our deductible to lower our premiums. With auto insurance, homeowners insurance, same thing. We can do the same thing with long-term care. So instead of getting a policy with a 90-day deductible, which in the long-term care world is called an elimination period, we can extend it to more than that. But 90 days is the standard, but some people might be able to hold off for 180 days. It really depends on the situation. But the bottom line is the longer that deductible period, which is the elimination period, the lower the premiums would be.
Okay, so we'll reiterate the tips to lower long-term care insurance premiums are
To increase the elimination period or to go for a lesser benefits. In other words, instead of going for a 5-year plan, maybe we go for a 4-year plan. Instead of getting a policy that's going to pay $5,000 a month in benefits, maybe we get a policy that pays $4,000 a month in benefit. But the important thing to remember is that once one goes on claim, the premiums are waived, so they don't have to continue to pay their premiums while they're on claim.
Do I need to have a physical examination before I qualify for coverage?
Typically not. It's basically the insurance company will obtain medical records from the individual's doctors, and then it'll go through what's called an underwriting process, where the underwriters will review the medical records and determine whether or not they're going to extend the coverage to the individual.
Okay. Can I take my long-term care insurance benefits overseas if I move to another country?
That depends on the carrier. So that's on a case-by-case basis. And we always ask, do you foresee yourself staying in the United States, or do you have plans to move out of the country? And that would determine the avenue that we would pursue.
You know, I know that financial professionals talk about inflation all the time. So, and costs are always rising. So how does inflation impact long-term care insurance benefits?
If we get inflation protection on the policy, whether it's 3% or 5%, each year the benefits that the individual purchased increases by that 3% or 5%.
Okay. Have you noticed any trends or innovations that are emerging in the long-term care insurance industry?
No.
Nothing comes to mind at the moment.
Nothing comes to mind.
But
Yes.
of course, in the medical field, there's always been quite interesting health-related, trying to keep people healthier for certain and away from doctors' offices. Perhaps an apple a day could keep the doctor away. The doctor might not
Yes.
want to hear this part because how will they bill? But how can you calculate how much long-term care insurance one might need again?
Well, basically, it depends on the geographic area. As I said, different parts of the country are cheaper or more expensive. And it also depends on what we can afford to purchase in terms of protection. So, for example, in my geographic area, Southeast Florida, if somebody needed an aide to come into the home to help out with those activities of daily living, bathing, eating, dressing, toileting, getting in and out of a chair, ambulating, then the aide would provide those benefits. And it would be somewhere in the range of, I would say, $25 to $35 per hour. So on the low end for an 8-hour shift, we're looking at $200 at a minimum. And those fees do increase over time. So 5 years from now, who knows? It might be $40 on the low end and $50 an hour on the high end. I don't know. I'm just guesstimating. But we do know the bottom line is that what it costs today is less than what it's going to cost down the road and into the future. If we go, and I do recommend people, if you've never been to an assisted living community, do make a trip. They would be welcoming. probably treat you to lunch there, give you a tour, give you information about what the costs are. And it's good to know, especially if you have relatives that are going to be needing it possibly in the future, to get that knowledge ahead of time so you know what it might cost, and you can see which are the places that are more reasonably priced, more expensive. Get that knowledge under your belt, so when the time comes, you've got that down pat. And I do recommend that for everybody. If you've never been to an assisted living community, do go. And it's an education, and you might be dazzled.
And Mrs. Finkelstein, I really do appreciate you letting us pick your brain all morning before we even have breakfast on this Sunday morning for people to understand. They might be thinking about long-term care issues. And that leads me to this question here. What advice, and I don't know what age this person might be when they're first starting to think about long-term care. They could be 20, they could be 30, they could be taking care of a parent. They could be 40, 50, 60, late in their 70s before they're even thinking about it, because life happens while making other plans. But what advice, whatever age they're at, would you give somebody just starting to think about long-term care?
Well, what comes to my mind is people typically don't think about long term care unless they've had an experience like I did where my mom needed help. When a relative, a parent, or some other relative needs help, that's typically when it becomes something that's real. And that's what happened to me. I was in my early 40s. My mom needed help, and the light bulb went off in my head, and I realized, hey, it happened to mom. It could one day happen to me. But what I find challenging is with clients that never had to experience that in their family, then it becomes something totally foreign to them. They just don't think about it, don't think into the future that they might need it one day. And that is a great challenge to overcome with individuals, because they kind of put their head in the sand, and it's not going to happen to me. It might happen to you and you, but it's not going to happen to me. And it's better to have it and not need it than to need the coverage and not have a plan in place to pay for it, because it can be expensive. So basically, even if we just look at the base rent without the levels of care, it's say $5,000 a month, that's $60,000 a year. Multiply that over 3 or 4 or 5 years. Well, now it starts to really add up to some big numbers. What is that going to do to their retirement nest egg that they've built up over decades to have their golden years and enjoy their golden years? Or are they going to spend that down just to pay for care? And what happens if both of them need care? It could be very, very expensive. And some people don't even have relatives around. So it's a big planning. I always say to people, if you don't have a plan in place for long-term care, your retirement monies are in tremendous jeopardy. And is it your intention to spend your retirement money for care? Was that what you intended to do when you were saving money, when you were socking money away into your 401k or your IRAs or whatever your qualified plans may be? Was that your intention, or was your intention to enjoy your retirement years and work hard and save for that down the road time period?
Now we
So
have 3 more questions left. And if anybody has a question and you're listening on LinkedIn or YouTube, feel free to comment under the live video on LinkedIn right now or YouTube right now, or you can come into the OMG Biz Cafe live talk radio studio at omgtalk.com. Click on the one button that's there, and then the top link goes right into the studio. I'll be able to see you, and you could ask your question live on the air. On that note, though, let's go into our last 3 questions. And we'll also put this up in OMG Biz Cafe. If you'd like to be part of the OMG Biz Cafe, you're welcome to email me at wow@omgtalk.com, and we'll introduce you to other business owners and entrepreneurs and workaholic professionals. So our last three questions. Let's see. Are there any hidden fees we didn't talk about or extra costs that I should watch out for when it comes to long-term care?
No, there's no hidden fees with long-term care protection plans, or as we say, long-term care insurance. There's no hidden fees. Everything is on paper, and clients get to choose from a couple of different options, whatever suits them the best. And as I said, and I want to stress, some coverage is better than no coverage. And Benjamin Franklin said, I always go back to this. I love this quote. People don't plan to fail. They just fail to plan.
Thank you for that. Let's see. Here's two more questions. Can long-term care insurance help cover the cost of a nursing home stay, even if I'm not living in the U.S.?
Oh, so will it cover a nursing home stay overseas? Is that the question?
Yes.
I'm not sure. I'd have to take a look into that.
Okay, fair enough. And what's the most common mistake that people make when buying long-term care insurance? Is there a mistake people make?
Well, the mistake would be not getting a plan in place. That would be mistake number one, because they think it may not happen to them, or they feel that they can't afford a long-term care protection policy. Well, my response to that, if you can't afford pennies on the dollar, how are you going to afford to pay for the 100% of the cost of care out of your own pocket? So if you can't afford paying for the premiums, which is just a small fraction of what it would cost if you had to pay for it out of pocket, how are you going to deal with it? So we have to have a plan in place to be able to pay for it and not to deplete our retirement nest egg.
Now, do you have any last thoughts you'd like to wrap up before we wrap up this amazing interview? I think it's been about 57 minutes of our morning before we even get to our morning breakfast. But any last thoughts before I do a wrap up?
If somebody is interested in exploring and see how it works, there's no cost, there's no obligation. I'm more than happy to have a conversation with individuals and couples to see how to protect their nest egg. And I did write a book, which is a book that I wrote several years ago. I wrote it specifically for women, but the information in the book does apply to men too. And there is a chapter there devoted to long-term care. So if anybody's interested, I could send them the book in an e-book version. I just would need their email address, and I would be happy to send that along the way. I will also have an article that was published in the Palm Beach Post a number of years ago talking about long-term care. And it's better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it.
Excellent. You also have another book that talks about another one of your specialties when it comes to Medicare. Do you want to talk about that?
Yes, certainly. I'm glad you brought that up. So my Medicare booklet, I call it a booklet because it's only 54 pages. I wrote for boomers and seniors, helping them to get clear about Medicare. So Medicare is one of those things that falls under that retirement planning umbrella. Along with retirement plans and income planning and Social Security, long-term care, Medicare, life insurance, all of that jazz falls under that retirement planning umbrella. And what I hear oftentimes for people that are embarking onto Medicare, typically they might be just turning 65. And they're confused, they're overwhelmed. That's what I hear all the time. I'm confused, I'm overwhelmed. I'm getting bombarded with phone calls, with literature, stuffing my mailbox. I don't know what to do, where to go, who to trust. And they end up collecting a stack of literature that they received in their snail mail, and just they'll deal with it one day into the future. Well, I say to them, you could either come to my webinar, or if you're local, you can come to my workshop to learn about long-term care. I also have both of my books are very easy to read. Very easy, very, very, very easy to read. I did it that way on purpose. And it's a guidebook. It explains the two different avenues that people can embark upon when they do go on Medicare, the pros and cons. And I like to tell them this is the pros and cons of doing this. This is the pros and cons of doing that, so that they are in a position to make a wise decision. And as an independent agent, I have access to many carriers, so I don't try to pigeonhole them into one carrier or one type of solution, because not everybody's the same. And people's needs and goals are different, and their budgets are different as well. So anybody who needs that guidebook, I'm more than happy to send that out as well. And Medicare, oftentimes people think that Medicare is going to pay for long-term care. No, it doesn't. What Medicare may pay for is some home health care, but it has to be skilled care. In other words, physical therapy, speech therapy, occupational therapy. Medicare would pay for that, but it would not pay for custodial care, which is typically what people who are receiving long-term care benefits need. Those custodial care is those activities of daily living, which is the bathing, eating, dressing, toileting, and so on. So Medicare does not pay for custodial care, only skilled care, and it's intermittent. It's not you can have somebody with you for 8 hours a day. That's not how Medicare home health care works.
Now, if somebody's listening to this in the archive on YouTube and LinkedIn, they stumble across this interview, how would you want them to reach out to you? A phone number you want to say twice and slowly, or download
Certainly.
your book, or email you?
Yeah, so the best way is, I would say, my phone, which is my cell, is 561 302 5760. Again, 561 302 5760. They could text me and ask me to send them my ebook. I'd be more than happy to do that. I also do a podcast. It's called The Sarah Finkelstein Show, where the next 10 minutes can change your life. And yes, sometimes I do go over 10 minutes, but I try to stay within 10 minutes or 12 minutes. And it's all information related on many topics: Medicare, long-term care, retirement planning, insurance, on and on and on. So it's not a big commitment. It's only about 10 minutes.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Just as a wrap up, we've been listening to Sarah Finkelstein, our long-term care insurance expert. We asked her a ton of questions, but here's just 4 that we've asked her. Can long-term care insurance help cover assisted living in a nursing home? How do I know if I need long-term care insurance? Is there a certain age when I should start thinking about long-term care insurance? And here's another one we did get a chance to ask her. What are some key things that people should look for in a long-term care insurance policy? Thank you so much for joining us, Sarah Finkelstein. I hope you have a fantastic breakfast with your husband. I wonder who that is.
Thank you for having me.
And this is a part of your breakfast, right? Me giving you this interview. And this is a very valuable content on a Sunday morning from 8:30 to 9:30. I can't say it might be every Sunday at 8:30 to 9:30, but it's an idea to, if you know a small business owner, entrepreneur, workaholic professional that has a specific niche that would like to be featured on OMG Biz Cafe, I'll tell you how you can do that, which the way you can do that is actually being our guest Monday through Friday at 10 a.m. or Saturdays at 8 a.m. in our studio in our live talk radio show, where we network and get to know each other and become an ambassador of OMG Biz Cafe community. We have a whole community, we have social media profiles, and we gather to help small business owners. Thanks so much, Sarah. Now Tony gets the last word. Who is Tony? Tony is the guy that did this voiceover.
You have been listening to the OMG podcast with Paul Finkelstein. We can help you build wealth without hogging your time. Schedule a one-on-one with us. Thanks for listening. Join us again for another OMG podcast segment.
And thank you, Tony. It's really great for you to do that voiceover. You could find Tony if you have a podcast or a radio show and you need some voiceover help besides an AI. He's a real person. You can find him at trcvoiceovers.com. Thanks so much, Sarah, for joining us today. Have a
Thank
wonderful
you.
day, everybody.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.